I'm Jaime Levine, and today in the studio I have Paul Downey. Paul has led serving seniors in San Diego for 30 years and just recently handed off the organization to CEO Melinda Forstey. During his tenure, he oversaw the development of 11 buildings and service of more than 1.5 million meals to low-income seniors. He spearheaded Serving Seniors Senior Homelessness, a needs assessment, whose recommendations led directly to the San Diego County Board of Supervisors approving the shallow rental subsidy program in September of 2021. Thank you for joining us today, Paul.
Great to be with you, Jamie.
I have to say that in my own experience, I've been working with seniors for many years, and in that entire time, you've been kind of the dominant figure. I've always kind of regarded you as sort of the senior person who's overseeing what's happening with senior services in San Diego.
Well, thank you. Well, I've had a lot of help, a lot of people, a great team around me, but I've been privileged to be able to use my advocacy skills and to be a voice for older adults in San Diego and across the country.
Well, you've done a lot, so it's wonderful to have you here today. I want to start with a little bit about your background. These are all things that I learned pretty recently, actually. I just knew you in that one role. But what I have here is that you began in radio in San Diego and Salt Lake City. Do you want to?
Yes. Well, I took probably a very unconventional path into the aging field and into the nonprofit world. So I grew up, I was a teenager in the early 70s, Watergate. And so being a reporter was something that I said, that's what I want to do, as I want to be Woodward and Bernstein and go chase down, presidents and all of that. And so, and I fortunately had a bit of a knack for writing, thanks to some very patient teachers in high school who helped teach me to write. And so when I went to San Diego State, that was the path I wanted to do, and broadcast was the direction. So first day as a freshman, I went to KCR, which was the campus radio station, and got myself, a job, working for free as doing both sports and news. And so started there. And my claim to fame is I was there when Tony Gwynn was playing baseball and basketball for San Diego State, and I did play-by-play for KCR. Now, nobody listened to KCR, but I still did it. And so second semester as a freshman year, a guy named Joe Gillespie, who was the news director for KSDO Radio in San Diego. KSDO at the time had an all-news format. And so he came to talk to us and tell us what real radio was like. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, look, I'll sweep the floor, I'll work for free. Can I just hang around the radio station? And somehow I managed to talk my way into an internship as a freshman, which you weren't supposed to do until you were a senior. But, I went back to my advisor and said, look, I talked my way into it. Can I do it? And they said yes. Shortly, several weeks into my internship, they had an opening for a night news editor on Saturday and Sunday from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. And they offered me a job. So I'm 18 years old. I have a job working in radio, going to school. Fast forward, a few months after that, they offered me a full-time job. And so working through college, I worked from 4 a.m. to noon at the radio station, did all of my classes in the afternoon and evening, and set off to, a career in broadcast journalism and, graduated, did all of that. Eventually moved on to Salt Lake City, where I was in broadcasting there for an all-news radio station and covered politics, and then anchored Morning Drive radio. So that's where all of it started.
Wow, that's incredible. At 18 years old to get into radio?
Yes. I don't know, had a big mouth, I guess, and somehow managed to. I had no business. I to this day, I think that my primary attribute is I'd work for minimum wage. Probably was why they hired me, but it gave me invaluable experience. And so suddenly, I graduated, I think, 22, 23 years old, graduating, and already had, 3 years experience in the field I wanted to pursue. And so I did that for a while. And then that led me into something called videotechs. And videotechs, I worked for the San Diego Union. I came back from Salt Lake City, went to work for the San Diego Union. And videotechs was the great-great-great-great-grandfather of online media. So this was early 80s. The San Diego Union and Tribune had an online version of the newspaper. It was crude by today's standards, but at that time, the thinking was that a radio guy who was used to writing short stories very short, was the right person, because nobody would want to read a long story on the computer. So I get hired and did that, and after a couple of years, the union decided that there was no future in this online stuff. Nobody could figure out how to monetize it, and we're not going to give up our newspaper.
What did online mean at that time?
Well, online was via cable. So what we did is we worked with the then Cox Cable and Times Mirror Cable, which was the other cable company in San Diego. And you had a huge device that would sit right next to your cable box, and you could call up a special channel, and there would be stories. Now it was just a sort of a blank background and text. We had no ability to do graphics or photos or anything like that, but you could get a sort of radioized version of the newspaper over your TV, that was revolutionary at the time. For those that sort of understand computers, the artists that we had to design the screens pixel by pixel on paper, and they would code it, the whole screen, and have to put it into the computer to get a background coming up. I mean, it was, as I say, it was Stone Age compared to today. But they decided no future, so I actually got a job. Then the LA Times was starting an online service, and at this point, the Commodore 64 computer had come out. So this was like one of the first computers. And so we were able to deliver it via computer, so similar to what you do now. And I got a job at the LA Times as an editor, overseeing much of the content, the non-hard news content. Did that for a couple of years, and they too decided there's no future in this. We can't figure out how to monetize. The technology wasn't anywhere near what it needed to be, so they pulled the plug. So, this was early 1986. I called my old boss at the San Diego Union, a guy named Peter Kay, who was the associate editor. He, like many people at the paper at that time, had bounced between the political world and the newspaper world. And so he had actually worked for Richard Nixon in 1952 when Nixon was running for vice president. He had ended up being Jerry Ford's press secretary during the '76 campaign. He had covered Watergate for PBS. Sort of an interesting, varied career, but he was in charge of the online. And so I called Peter and I said, I'm out of a job. I need a job. Anything going on? And this is when Maureen O'Connor was running for mayor in early '86. Roger Hedgecock had been tossed out of office. And he said, have you ever thought of going over to the other side? As a reporter, at this point I needed a job. So I said, yes, I need it. And so he introduced me to Maureen, and I agreed to go on as her campaign press secretary. And then if she won, we would sit down and talk about it. And she won, we talked about it, and I said yes. And worked for her, term and a half, because she was filling out Hedgecock's term. So about almost 7 years in office. And it was there while I was working for Maureen, we would go over once a month and volunteer to serve lunch at serving seniors. It was known as senior community centers at the time, but once a month I would go over, and it was a slow start for me because I do have to admit that Maureen came into a staff meeting and said, we're all going to go volunteer at the local senior center. And I was 27 years old, and my first reaction was, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That doesn't sound very good. The only thing that I can say is I was smart enough not to say those words out loud.
Right.
And so I'm, figuratively sort of dragged along. And within the first few minutes, I went from being dragged to being enthusiastic. And I probably did a poor job of delivering the food, but I started talking to people and getting stories. And because serving seniors really focuses on folks in poverty, it was sort of the 2x4 over the head. I mean, I grew up in a middle-class family. I studied poverty in college, but I had no real experience with it. And suddenly I'm talking to people who are struggling to pay their rent, pay for food, pay for the basic necessities. And it was like, it was literally the 2x4. And so I quickly went from being the reluctant guy to helping organize every month and did all of that. And then when her term ended, had to make a decision about what I was going to do. And, did I go back to journalism? Did I stay in the political world? Ultimately, I decided I went and became the assistant CEO at the San Diego Workforce Partnership, which does all the job training programs in town, and did that for a couple of years. And then the job at Serving Seniors came open. And
which job was it?
It was the president CEO job.
Oh, wow.
And so I had served as the number 2 person at the Workforce Partnership. So I had, built some management, senior leadership experience, but I had the political connections and applied. They hired me, and 30 years later. So as I say, it was a convoluted path into aging, sort of an accidental path. But once I got there, it was just the passion for the issue drove me, and got to serving seniors and never had a desire to leave.
Wow. How old were you when you started serving seniors?
I was 36.
36. Wow.
36. So I started May 8th, 1995, and retired May 8th, 2025. So 30 years to the day of being hired.
Amazing.
Retired. But it was, and actually all of the things that I did previously to accepting the job actually built the foundation for me as I dove in at serving seniors, and a lot of it was, admittedly at the time, I was making a lot of it up as I was going along because, I had some experience, but it was a new world. I had to learn aging policy. Serving seniors at the time was, I'll use the polite term fledgling, but it was really in, kind of deep trouble from a financial standpoint. And so there were times when I thought I would be the last president and CEO in the organization's history. We had to really struggle, but that was a good education for me because it really helped formulate how to do things. And I was fortunate to have a lot of people around me that I could go to and tap into to guide me.
Yeah. So when you took on that role at Serving Seniors, how long had Serving Seniors been in existence, and how did it come into existence, and what did it look like? Well,
the organization started in 1970, and so this was 1995. So I guess 25 years. It had been in existence, and originally it was actually part of Catholic Charities, and it was the first senior organization in San Diego. It was the first senior meal provider in San Diego in the early 70s, and then for reasons that unfortunately are lost to history because nobody knows exactly why, in 1973, it split off and became a separate 501c3 and split off from Catholic Charities. And so there were no records and unfortunately nobody around who could ever tell us why, how or why. But for whatever reason, in 1973, it split off and became a separate entity. And so one of the unique things actually is that in the organization's history, I was only the third CEO in the history, and Melinda is only the fourth. Wow. And the organization is now 56 years old.
Amazing.
And we've only had 4 CEOs, which I think says something about the organization and about the mission that people stay. And so both of my predecessors, between them, were 10 years plus before I came in 1995.
Oh, that's amazing. So what did you see, and what was your vision at that point, and how did that sort of evolve?
Well, my vision was, first of all, to try to get the train on the tracks and to build a financial financial stability.
Were there budget issues?
There were budget issues, right? Because at that point, the organization was primarily doing meals with a little bit of case management, but again, dealing with folks who were dealing with extreme poverty and just generating the fundraising and bringing in dollars and tightening up policies, procedures, and people, you know this in the nonprofit world, you have to run it like it is a business. It's a charitable business. You're doing good work, but you have to run it like a business. And, it needed a little bit of tightening up. But the thing that influenced me the most was early. This was about 3 months into my tenure at Serving Seniors. This was a Monday morning, and 3 seniors came in asked if they could see me. A woman named Marvel, a guy named Ben, and a woman named Helen. And Marvel was about 5 feet tall, but a garrulous, big personality. Ben was a legitimate World War II hero. He was Filipino, fought in the Philippines, ended up on MacArthur's staff, and Helen was a retired nurse. And they came in and they told me that over the weekend, 2 of our seniors had died, separately from each other, had died, but neither one of them had a family. And there wasn't going to be any service. In fact, the county was going to take care of their remains. And so they asked if we could hold a memorial in the dining room for them. And I said, sure, happy to. I said, do you know, were they religious? I'm happy to, reach out and see if I can get, a minister, priest, rabbi to come in and conduct a service. And Marvel literally got in my face and she said, no, we want you to do it. Oh. And I said, I'm not a minister, but I'm happy to get one. And then she got in my face again and she said, no, it has to be somebody who knew them. She said, none of us are afraid to die. We're afraid nobody will notice. You have to do it because you knew them. And you have to show that they were noticed and that their death meant something. And I was, at that point, the lightning bolt could have hit me because the concept that somebody could die and nobody would know or care was not a concept in my 36 years I had ever thought about. And I saw in the 3 of them, the real fear, that was their concern. And so, of course, at that point, I said, yes, of course I will do it. And then, over the ensuing 30 years, I literally did hundreds of memorials for seniors who had nobody else, and made sure that they were noticed. And that got even further reinforced that, if you ever saw me walk into Serving Seniors, I looked like a politician because I was waving and nodding. Because a little while after that, I had walked into the building one day, walked through the dining room, and there was a woman waving at me that I didn't see. And she started crying. And I went back and somebody pointed out, and she was upset that I hadn't seen her, hadn't noticed her. And so I realized the loneliness that people had and the need to be validated that they're human. And so, as I say, not you would see me. I mean, I'm shaking hands, waving, nodding, making sure that everybody in my vicinity is seeing that they're noticed. But and when you ask me sort of what ended up driving me was that these realizations that in my middle class existence were beyond anything that I ever thought about. And so I made that my mantra is that, everybody's noticed, everybody's respected. Doesn't matter if you're experiencing homelessness, you're mentally ill, you're living in poverty, but you're a person and need to be acknowledged and validated, and that you're not going to die and have nobody notice.
Yeah, I think that comes through in the ensuing work that you did, that compassion. But let's talk about what you did once you were in that position and you had these moments of these epiphanies where you really felt for these people.
Well, the thing that from a sort of the number standpoint, I mean, this is sort of the emotional 2x4, but the numbers 2x4 was when I started looking at their income, understanding the income, and that at serving seniors, and this was true throughout, about 90% of the folks that we saw lived below the federal poverty level, so $1,300 roughly a month. Now, back then it was even less. And you looked at the cost of even single-room occupancy hotel rooms or apartments and realized that most of the folks were living on a couple $100s a month, $200-300 a month at best after they paid their rent. And so it meant that everybody we served almost was always on the cusp of homelessness, of falling over. I mean, they were right on the edge to fall over if we weren't there to bolster them and make sure that they didn't fall over the edge because the financials were such. And in that, and I know we'll talk a little more about homelessness, but that's what leads to the homelessness is when you have no safety margin. The math doesn't work if you fall behind in rent. You can't catch up. And so that also drove me recognizing that these folks, if we weren't there was no viable plan B. And so we had to step in. So meals were the key. I mean, that was the key thing. And originally we did just lunch, both in congregate and home delivered. But this was sort of another story. And actually at that time, only 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, closed every holiday. Well, one day, this was maybe 8 or 9 months into my time there was one of our volunteers, a guy named Gilbert, who helped clean the tables, and he lived in an SRO about a block away at that point. And I saw him on a Monday, and I had said, "Oh, good to see you." And he said, "Yeah, I'm really hungry." And I said, "Well, Gilbert, what do you do over the weekend to eat?" And he said, "Well, I go to Burger King, and I get a Whopper, and I cut it into 4 pieces. And I eat a quarter of it for lunch, quarter of it for dinner on Saturday, a quarter of it on Sunday for lunch and dinner." And I said, all. I said, "Well, I don't have any, that's all I can afford." And so I said, "We can't have that." And I started doing some surveys and realizing, maybe the others weren't maybe quite as dire as that, but they had no food options. And so from Friday lunch to Monday, weren't eating much of anything. And so I said, we have to step in. And so we ramped up our meals to 7 days a week, open 7 days a week, delivering home delivered 7 days a week. And I said, we have to add breakfast. because I went to the dietitian and I said, right now I can only afford to do 2 meals. Which 2 meals should we do? And she said, if you're going to only do 2, do breakfast and a hearty lunch that is like a dinner. I mean, a heavy enough dinner. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we did, and built the nutrition program because obviously we need to eat. And if you're worrying about food, you're not worrying about everything else. You're not worrying about your housing. You're not worrying about your health. You're not worried. I mean, that's central. So before we can even help people with their health issues, their social interaction, activity, anything like that, you got to make sure they're fed. So that led us, in the late 90s to dramatically increase the number of meals that we were doing, and became literally one of the only senior centers and senior organizations that operated 365 days a year.
Oh, wow.
In the country. And that's to this day, I think there's like 5 or 6 that operate 365, but that's because of the poverty. And when I retired a year ago, serving seniors was doing about 14,000 unduplicated people a year, most of those on a daily basis, and again, 90% of them living right on the cusp of homelessness. So we made that investment. That was the first major investment that we did.
And is that at multiple senior centers, the nutrition program?
Yes. Yeah. So I think at the time, we had 4 or 5, and then we gradually built it up to, I think now there's like 12 or 13 sites that are out there. And then the home delivered meal side of it.
Right.
So now the organization is doing about 1.5 million meals a year, which puts it in the top 10 in the country in terms of meals. But it was really that was really, and a lot of that was fueled by COVID. Going into COVID, we were doing about 750,000 meals, but then the governor said, you got to stay home, you can't go out, and seniors were rightfully petrified about catching COVID.
Yeah.
And so between the March of 20 and May of 20, we literally doubled the number of meals that we were producing out of our kitchen. I mean, it was a crazy time, but people needed to be fed. So that always was the core that we did.
Mm-hmm. How many employees or volunteers do you have?
Serving seniors had when I left, there was 144 employees and over a couple thousand volunteers.
Wow.
Because volunteers were always the key. In fact, when I worked for the mayor, the program was called Serving Senior Volunteer. And that was and then as we looked to rebrand from senior community centers, it made sense that, have your name be your mission. And we adopted it as the name of the organization. But, we rely on volunteers because if you go to any serving senior congregate site, we utilized volunteers to serve the meals. So it's a dignity that you are served. You're not going through a soup line, but you're served. And the most important purpose was, though, I mean, I always say the food is important, but as what I learned, it's the social interaction. Because most of those folks are living by themselves. And that interaction with that volunteer. And I tell volunteers, I don't care if you talk about the weather, the Padres, the beach, whatever. Engage in a conversation with that person, because you might be the only person that they interact with all day, and that social aspect is critically important. For the home delivered meals, unlike other programs, we actually always utilize paid drivers for 2 reasons. One is because of the volume, that each driver is responsible for delivering like 50 to 55 meals. But I wanted the same driver's eyes on the person every single day, so that today Mrs. Smith is dressed, looks good. Next day she's disheveled, seems disoriented. I never expected the driver to be able to, do a biopsychosocial analysis of the person, but I expected them to say something isn't right here, and contact a social worker, and we could intervene. And so that we always use the paid driver model, and they still do. I mean, that's core, and we use the volunteers in the congregate site.
Okay, so that's you were tending to their nutrition and their social well-being and their physical and potentially mental health well-being by having someone interact with them. What about the housing element, the homelessness and housing part of it?
Well, and that was what popped up, is that in the late 90s, we were seeing significant increases in the number of seniors experiencing homelessness. And at the time, the city had opened up, it was the old Carnation plant down in downtown in East Village. Now it's, I think, been redeveloped into an arts area. But it was an old warehouse that they were housing people experiencing homelessness. I mean, it was a horrible facility. Mm-hmm. I mean, they literally had about a dozen porta potties for a couple hundred people, no running water, open to the outside. But that was, at the time, the best the city, I guess, could do. But it was only a couple blocks from, at the time, our main site was at 9th and Broadway downtown. And we discovered that there were significant numbers of seniors in that. There was like 40 or 50 seniors. And so we arranged to send, we had a mini bus that we sent over, and every morning would bring the seniors out of there over to our congregate dining site at 9th and Broadway so they could get food and get access to our case managers, because they weren't getting any case management. It was basically a place off the street. And that's how we got involved, as we realized this is, a much bigger issue than we anticipated. And then concurrently at the time, we were seeing major redevelopment going on downtown, which is where most of the SROs existed at the time. So they're being torn down, and high-rise condos, offices going up in their place. So we were losing the cheapest housing out there. Cheapest market rate housing was being destroyed without a good plan on how it was going to be replaced. And so we had those two issues. We had dramatic increases in the number of meals we were doing, and so I looked at it and I said, we need to get into the housing business. Get into the housing business, we can use the housing business to help build ourselves a new kitchen, and we need to come up with a concurrent program to start helping seniors experiencing homelessness. And so in 1999, we partnered up with Chelsea Investment Corporation, which is a large affordable housing developer, and started developing housing, which eventually became our Potiker family senior residence at 14th and Market, where we also built a large commercial kitchen to meet our meal demands. But we also partnered at the time with the county to get funding to create the transitional housing program, where we master leased units at the Sarah Francis, which is an SRO on 10th Avenue, master leased units, and that our case, it was a true housing first model, because someone experiencing homelessness could come in that day, meet with a case manager, and we could place them into one of those units that we controlled, who got in, the rent was being paid, we could provide meals, we could provide support services, with the goal of transitioning folks out. And that was our first foray into that. And over the years, we eventually expanded the number of units that we were providing. And so we're doing that path, and then the affordable housing path that we started building. And so Potiker was our first one downtown, and then we did now a couple in City Heights, Claremont, Ramona. And so when I left, we were about 700 units that we had developed of affordable housing.
Was that all with Chelsea?
It was all with Chelsea, and it was a good partnership, because Chelsea is a for-profit entity, and of course affordable housing doesn't work without the nonprofit partner. And
right.
So we were a boisterous partner, for I think they would say, from their perspective, because we insisted on not a lot of nonprofits in affordable housing with a for-profit are passive, and we were not. We insisted on being involved in every aspect of the development and making sure that the buildings met our standards and that they were affordable. That we didn't want to have because sometimes affordable housing is not affordable for very low income folks, and that was something always important to us to develop. But that initial foray also got me involved from statewide and national advocacy, because of those days nobody was talking about seniors experiencing homelessness, despite being a significant percentages.
Yeah.
And we just saw the point in time count here in San Diego, and while overall the numbers were not bad, the one category where we saw a 4% increase were for older adults.
Yeah.
And went to 33%. So a full third of the people on our streets now are older adults, and that number just continues to click upwards.
Right. And I mean, when seniors are homeless, it's a more precarious situation. It's really dangerous.
It's dangerous, and in many cases, doesn't need to be, because most of the folks, and we've studied it. Others have studied it. Margot Kuschel from University of San Francisco studied this. For seniors experiencing homelessness, it is mostly economic. So it means money could have solved the problem before they ended up on the street. But what happens is, when they're on the street, physical issues get exacerbated. Chronic diseases don't get treated. Mental health, most of the seniors do not have a core mental health issue, but the longer they're on the street, they develop PTSD type issues. So we're talking about anxiety and depression, which can lead to self-medicating. Primarily with alcohol becomes the sort of addiction of choice after people have been out there for an extended period of time. But way back at the beginning, they did not have an addiction problem. They did not have a mental health problem. They had an economic problem. And so what happens, though, is that those people on the street then become, and then, obviously there's the human issue, but there's also an economic issue, because they become high utilizers of the emergency department at hospitals.
Right.
That's the only place they go. And quite often, because they have a chronic disease, suddenly it's a very expensive problem. It could be literally, if you're in ICE, and we worked with somebody at UCS&D, this is now a couple of years ago information, but in like 2023, 2024, it was about $250,000 a week if you were in ICU.
Oh my God.
So you think about the prevention, to preventing somebody who has diabetes, they don't get their insulin, ends up in a diabetic coma, ends up in ICU. There's a direct nexus between prevention and saving a heck of a lot of money on the other side. So we really became advocates for prevention. But one of the issues for people, this is a current issue that we're still fighting the advocacy battle, is many folks don't know that if you cannot meet your activities of daily living, or ADL as it's known, so we're talking about being able to dress yourself, feed yourself, toilet yourself, basic things. In San Diego, you cannot get into a shelter. They don't have caregiver. They don't have somebody to provide caregiving to assist you. So what happens is that if I show up at the door and I can't dress myself, I need assistance, and I say I have this issue, say sorry, you can't come in, and I've met with numerous shelter providers. I served on the Continuum of Care board for the Regional Task Force on Homelessness, and this was one of our tasks. I said to the shelter providers, so what do you do? Well, most times they call 911. Because they feel bad. They're empathetic. They feel badly, this person. And so what happens is the person goes to the emergency department. And they get to the emergency department. The emergency room doc looks at them and says, I'm sorry you can't shower. I'm sorry you can't feed yourself, but that's not an emergency department issue.
Mm-hmm.
Out you go. And the cycle repeats. The other thing that occurs is that somebody goes in and there is a presenting issue that gets them admitted to the hospital. And we worked very closely with Scripps on this issue, that Scripps reported they will sometimes have people in the hospital for 4 to 6 weeks because they can't release them because they have an ADL issue. No shelter will take them, and they can't release them to the street. So they have whatever the presenting issue has been dealt with, and they now 4 to 6 weeks in the hospital simply because they can't dress or feed themselves at a cost of tens of thousands of dollars and taking up a valuable bed, all because we don't have a mechanism to take care of people who can't meet their ADLs in shelters. And so you say, well, the obvious answer is, well, let's hire caregivers. Well, you go to the shelter operators, and then suddenly they're worried about liability. I have a worker helping somebody take a shower, and they slip and fall, and so it's trying to work through how do you, indemnify, how do you get that assistance, and then most of all, when somebody does have an ADL, how do you get them out of the shelter as quickly as possible into a much better setting? But this will happen tonight. This happens every single day, where you have people who can't meet their ADLs are turned away. And so the most frail folks can't get into a shelter. And this is also true for people who have disabilities. Younger people with disabilities, the same issue occurs. And so to sort of pull it back up to the 30,000-foot level for seniors experiencing homelessness, you have the physical issues, the mental issues, and there's a huge cost issue if you simply could go back and prevent it.
Right. So how do you take that situation with the incentives that don't align at all and turn it into something that can be dealt with policy?
Well, this is where the shallow rental subsidies and the prevention. And so, several years ago, I started shouting from the hilltops, let's focus on prevention. Because historically, if you look at how homelessness from a policy perspective was dealt with, it started from the day the person became homeless, mm-hmm. and ended the day that they were handed the keys to their permanent housing. But I said, wait, there's a piece back here that if we stop the homelessness from occurring, the same thing as your doctor. If you have diabetes and you take insulin, you prevent the diabetic coma. If you have heart disease and you get the bypass operation so you don't have a heart attack, you've prevented, bad outcomes on the other end. How about we focus on this? And so we had done a comprehensive needs assessment at Serving Seniors, where we had gotten a $100,000 grant from the Hearst Foundation, and we hired a professional researcher. And we went back and discovered, we asked 400. We had a pool sample size of 400 seniors who had experienced homelessness. And one of the questions was, how much money would you have needed to have prevented the homelessness from occurring? Well, 54% said $300 or less. 72% said $400 or less would have prevented the homelessness. And so this was another one of those two by four over the head moments where, a modest amount of money prevented human trauma. But go back to the economic side. Let's say $3,600 a year. $4,800 if you go to $400. A modest amount of money prevents it. And then you look at the whole costs of the other side. And, depending on who you ask, but the Nationalized End Homelessness Study, they estimate that it costs about $50,000 a year for somebody on the street. When you factor in police, fire, paramedic, hospital, criminal justice system, all of those factors, but even if it's only $30,000, we pointed out you could spend, let's call it $5,000 a year, and you prevent it, or you could spend $50,000 or even $30,000 on the other side to treat it on the other side. And so we were able to take that and went to the Board of Supervisors and met with Supervisor Joel Anderson. We met with all of them, but Supervisor Anderson was the one who took the lead. And he said, this makes sense. And so he became our champion. And then he actually reached across the aisle, as one of the more conservative members of the board. He reached across the aisle to Tara Lawson-Remer, one of the more liberal members of the board. And they formed a partnership to lead the way to have the county enact a shallow rental subsidy program that is still in existence. And the data is showing that it is preventing people from falling through the cracks. And so we went to the city of San Diego, and Shawnee Rivera and some other council members took that up, and the city implemented a plan and is seeing similar results. Lucky Duck Foundation has invested several $100,000 into it, and it's working. It's preventing the trauma. It's and all, equally important, preventing this huge expense on the other side. So we've been trying to push the state of California to enact it. The state uses they're called HAP, Housing and Homeless Assistance Program funding. Over $1 billion is spent annually, and arguably not to some great success in places. Mm-hmm. And so the argument has been, how about we divert some of that money into prevention? And you can do it for seniors, you can do it for families, you can do it for veterans, you can do it for any population, but intervene before it occurs. And it's easy enough to target the people who need it by simply looking at their income. And so we were targeting people at about 30% of area median income or below. So, we're talking the poorest of the poor. You intervene and you prevent them from becoming homeless. So it's something that I think it's an easy policy that makes almost too much sense. You spend a little now or a lot later, and from a human standpoint, you don't cause the trauma. And so I still believe to this day, this is something we need to push more on. And every time we talk about homelessness policy, you need to talk about the continuum from prevention all the way to affordable housing.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's very effective. How does it actually work? Technically speaking, how does the money get used?
So what happens is, so you apply, and in this case to the county and the city, and it's based on income. And so what happens is the money, the subsidy goes directly from the governmental entity to the landlord, and the rent is reduced by that amount. If it went to the person, it would be considered income and could potentially impact other programs that they're involved in. Maybe it could be Medi-Cal, it could be other some of their SSI and things like that. So you don't want to create income for the person, but if it goes straight, it achieves the same result where their rent is reduced by the subsidy. And so both the county and the city decided that $500 was the amount that they do. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, rents continue to go up. And so now, even a market rate for an SRO is $1,000 or more.
Right.
But it still helps enough to keep people housed. And the corollary to that is also doing the one-time payment. So if I'm a senior and I'm living on $200 to $300 a month after my rent, I get behind. It is mathematically impossible for me to ever catch up my rent. So I'm suddenly $1,000 behind in rent. If city, the county, nonprofit intervenes, writes a check for $1,000 to the landlord to keep them from being evicted, the landlord's happy because to evict somebody, it can cost $4,000 or $5,000 in legal fees. Yeah. organizations like you folks having to defend the person from being and there's a huge expense that can be avoided. But the biggest one is keeping the person in the housing and avoiding having them on the street by simply, $1,000 saves tens of thousands on the other side. And again, I don't want to minimize the human element, but these are policies that make sense and I think could make a dent. Because when you look at homelessness, there's no one magic pill that solves it. Mm-hmm. It's a multiple of things that have to be implemented to solve it, but a big one is just stopping it before it occurs.
Yeah. So the lawyer in me is asking, is it legally speaking, like, is there a contract between the landlord and the tenant and a landlord and the city, like with Section 8, or is it a different model?
It's an agreement between all three. So the landlord is agreeing to take the money from the county, and so there is some additional bureaucracy that comes with that. Mm-hmm. But the landlord, just like with a Section 8 voucher, knows that they're at least going to get $500 in rent. And if they have some degree of empathy of not wanting to boot an 85-year-old grandma out on the street, they're willing to work with it. The tenant understands that he or she is responsible for paying the balance. Mm-hmm. And if they don't pay the balance, they're subject to eviction, just like they would have been if they had not paid whatever the full rent was. So everybody is involved. Most of the people, like serving seniors, would have case managers that would also be involved, sort of making sure that everything is working properly. One of the lessons that we learned, and sort of unfortunately one of our hypotheses got broken in this, is the intent originally was to have this be temporary. Mm-hmm. While you got them into a Section 8 voucher, or you got them into an affordable housing, or you found another shared housing, another option, and so that it wasn't going to be permanent. The reality was there are not enough options on the other side to transition them to. Yeah. And so it became clear that these types of programs will need to essentially be ongoing. Mm-hmm. I mean, but it's different than the Section 8 voucher. It's acknowledging that a Section 8 voucher generally gets people to a comfortable place because mm-hmm. they're paying a third of their income. This shallow rental subsidy doesn't necessarily get them to a comfortable place, but it keeps them housed. Right. That's the goal of it, is to keep them housed. Mm-hmm. So that's something we just have to wrestle with, that particularly for seniors, they're not going to suddenly at 85 go back to work. With younger populations, veterans or families, younger people, you could absolutely implement it as a temporary situation, and we're going to help you get you some job training, we're going to get you back, get you working, and once you're working, we reduce the subsidy for you at that point.
Right. Is this currently being used in San Diego, and what is serving seniors currently?
Currently, yes.
Okay.
So both the county and the city have continued, even during.
That's great.
And the city is it's in the mayor's budget, and even though a tight budget, because there's a recognition that it works. Mm-hmm. It's one of the homelessness programs that absolutely is working. So the money is there, and with serving seniors, has received several hundred thousand. I think the last grant was something like $700,000 from Lucky Duck to also administer shallow rental subsidies and keep people housed. So it's working.
That's great.
And I think that serving seniors is partnering with the Housing Commission for so Lucky Duck is for the city of San Diego side. So partnering with the Housing Commission, that's actually the entity that is paying the rents to the landlords, and serving seniors is doing all of the case management, identifying the clients, getting them through the process. and keeping them housed.
And are they attempting to grow the program? Is that the idea?
Oh, absolutely, to grow, but the logical step is to get it to the state and have it become a bigger program. And right now, the impediment, and I've spoken to some cabinet secretaries, some senior people in the governor's office. They don't say this. My observation is that it's a turf issue, because the funding is in different pots, and so where are you going to take it from, and who's going to be upset that if you take the money? And my argument is that there's some programs that clearly are not working when you look at how we're dealing with homelessness.
Right.
That let's look at basically on performance. If you're not performing, you lose the money and give it to programs that are performing. And so that seems to be the biggest issue of trying to carve out money, is that various political influences out there are keeping the money. They want to keep the money, and so. But my argument is you don't have to increase the budget. I understand the budget numbers, but how about use it for something that is clearly working and can be replicated to other populations?
Fabulous. So one area that you have a fair amount of experience with is building buildings. So you did it in partnership for over many years, and 11 buildings. Is that how many buildings you ended up building?
Oh, it's somewhere around that. Yeah,
It doesn't really matter.
We've got a number. It's about 700 units all.
700 units
all totaled, and then with the complexes, because we partnered on a couple of them where we had family housing was also built as part of it, and that was the latest. In fact, in Claremont, the last piece of it just opened a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
And that was built as an intergenerational complex. And in fact, our City Heights, we developed there in partnership with Price Philanthropies.
Oh.
And there's a family component and a senior component. Serving seniors provides the case management and activities for both. So if City Heights was originally developed as a specifically purpose-built intergenerational, because real neighborhoods, you have young people, old people, middle-aged people. You have a whole plethora of different folks all interacting, as opposed to we're going to put all of the seniors in this box over here, all the families over here. So we developed that as an intergenerational, and then we went to Claremont and did the same thing. And so I can't speak for what they're doing now, but I would think that the goal is, whenever possible, is to build intergenerational housing, so that you have these true neighborhoods.
Talk about the resistance that we've had in terms of building low-income housing in general, NIMBY attitudes, and there are certainly examples from long ago where there were some pretty awful developments in place.
Well, can I show you some of the scars from the battles? I can show you the scars from. Literally, I have to. With the exception of Ramona, every project that we built, we had significant NIMBY pushback, and including even when we built our Gary and Mary West Senior Wellness Center downtown, so a senior center. People would stand up at public meetings and say, "We don't want those people in our neighborhood." And I said, I would have some shame if I were saying those words out loud, but they didn't. And there was this intense pushback that, we don't want poor people, and downtown, particularly, it was sort of ironic. You had people who bought their luxury condos, 6 months ago in an urban environment, and now suddenly, we don't want low-income seniors around. In every neighborhood, you get, well, we don't want affordable. We don't want those people. And I think some of it may harken back to the days. People always think of affordable housing. They think of the projects in New York and those types of things. And but if you look at affordable housing, it doesn't have to be ugly. It looks just like any other apartment complex, that's out there. I mean, with architects, creative use of color and textures and whatnot. I mean, you can do quite a bit to make it look attractive without having to spend a ton of money. And so the irony is that with exception of Ramona, every other place that we had this massive pushback and people screaming and yelling, "We don't want you here." After we're in there, not a peep.
Oh, that's great.
Because suddenly, the seniors are part of the fabric of the neighborhood. They're going to the local stores. They're, interacting with their neighbors, and, gee, it's not so bad. And they suddenly realize these are people, and just like they are, just like the neighbors are. But that is one of the big challenges. I mean, the biggest challenge, of course, with affordable housing in San Diego is availability of land at a price that works for affordable housing. So the last several projects that we did it was government, it was county property that were Price, in the case of Price in City Heights, they donated the land.
Wow.
But affordable housing takes way too long in California, and you have to control the land for the entire issue. Right now, it's like 7-8 years to bring a project to fruition, and you have to control the land from day one in order to get your funding and your permits and approvals and all of that. So the challenge is finding a piece of property. And then as a nonprofit, how do you tie up that property for 7 or 8 years and tell the owner, gosh, and at the end of the day, if we don't get funding, we're going to say thanks and walk away. I mean, that's essentially what you have to do. That's why, government surplus land is the best, because government's willing to work with you, or a philanthropist, like Robert Price was willing to donate the land. Actually, his dad donated the land for our other City Heights property. Wow. We have two there. So we were able to do it. But that's one of the big problems, is how do you control the land while you work through the process of lining up all your funding.
Yeah. So what are we going to see in the future? Are there other buildings that are coming online? Is it just getting too cost prohibitive? What's happening?
Well, it's they're going to come online, but the problem is that, from my perspective, is there's also an incredible waste of money in affordable housing because of the process. So, as an affordable housing developer, what you would have to do is, first of all, figure out how you acquire the land, however you do that. Then you usually need 4 or 5 different funding sources that you need to go government-related funding sources, with the last one being an allocation of tax credits. And you have to go on this sort of quest, because you have to go usually in a certain order in a highly competitive process. So you get the first one, and then there's a 6-8 month lag until you can go for the next one. And then you miss funding by 1/10 of a point, which literally is what happens. So now you got to wait 6 or 8 months till you try again for that one. And then you get the next one, and then the next one. And then the final step is you go for the tax credit allocation, where it is, again, intensely competitive. And by this point, you're 5 years into the process. And by, some estimates I've seen in California is that this process costs about $150,000 a unit to the overall cost of building the housing. When you see in affordable housing, people sometimes go ballistic when they say the cost per unit is $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a unit. What they have to remember is that in California, that call it profit that a developer gets, the developer fee, is capped. It's $2.6 million. So it doesn't matter if it takes you 4 years, 8 years, 10 years. It doesn't matter if you do 50 units, 100 units, you're capped. So if your unit cost is $700,000, nobody is getting rich except for all the people along the way that are benefiting by the delays of building the housing. But the big one is this sort of process of waste of dollars. So, you do a 100-unit project and you could save $150,000 a unit. I mean, before you know it, you're talking about real money that you could then allocate to more housing. And so I've been a major, myself and many others, it's not something that I'm doing alone, have been an advocate of what you see elsewhere, where you take all of the funding sources and put it into one pot. Similar to what happens with homelessness funding. If you go for homelessness funding, they take federal, state, local, all gets tossed into a pot. You apply for it, and you get funded or you don't get funded. But if we could consolidate the funding process and shorten the time frame, we could move forward and build more affordable housing faster. I mean, and in a not so joking way, I've talked to elected officials who, when they thump their chests, say, we've got more money for affordable housing, I say, great. And in 2034, when we open the housing, we'll be very grateful that you got this money. But, several months before I retired at Serving Seniors, I met with a group of market rate developers, apartment developers, part of the Realtors Association. And they were interested in developing affordable housing, but trying to do it from a commercial market rate perspective. And, then they sort of realized that the subsidy is the problem. But we compared notes of how long it would take.
Mm-hmm.
And they said they can do it in usually like 3 to 4 years, get it built. And they could build it for about 2/3 the cost of what it was taking us 7 to 8 years to build. Because, if you and I were going to go build an apartment complex, we're going to, identify the land. We're going to, figure out what, put together a budget. We're going to figure out how much money we're going to, invest, how much of a loan we're going to take. And at the end of the day, what rents do we need to cover our debt and give a reasonable ROI on our investment? Go hire an architect, go build it. I mean, that's the process. We, as affordable housing, go into it and say, first of all, there's no ROI. We have no money to bring to the table. So we basically got to line up everybody else's money. And, the question is, can we line up the money and will it pencil at the end of the day? We have to project today. So if we were starting a project today, when we start construction in 2031, 2032, what are costs going to be? You have to build in a huge contingency factor of what your building costs are going to be, and so the system needs to be shortened, sped up, so we can bring more units online. Because ultimately, when we talk about homelessness and the affordability crisis in places like San Diego, you need supply on the other end. You need prevention on this end, and you need supply on the other end. And so when I talk about affordable housing solutions, we can't build our way out of it. We need to have an all of the above strategy. So you need things like shared housing. You need reasonable ADUs out there. I mean, you can't have people building apartment complexes in their backyard, but, rational use of ADUs so you give them more affordable housing. But we need all of that if we're going to, meet the demographic demand that's just going to keep hitting us in terms of older adults.
Yeah, that's timeline is really difficult to work with.
It's it's frustrating. I mean, I talk to people. I've approached saying that this organization or that organization, we want to get into the affordable housing business, and I say, good luck to you, but you're crazy. Because it's rough and tumble, and even if you do get, the developer fee at the end, I mean, you have expended in terms of time and effort much more than you receive
Yeah.
for building it. But at the end of the day, I mean, the need is there. So as a nonprofit, you're going to do it. For-profit developer, there's no incentive to want to do. I mean, at Chelsea, this is their specialty, but a market rate developer building affordable housing, and there's no money.
Is Chelsea still working with
Serving seniors? Yeah.
Oh, they are.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So Serving Seniors is part of the Midway Rising project down by the sports arena. So there's going to be some affordable senior housing as part of about 400 units, assuming that project actually comes to fruition.
Right.
But is continuing to work with it. So Chelsea's model is to build it. They have their own construction company, so they're able to sort of do vertical integration to generate enough profit that it makes it worthwhile. But as the operator, the other challenge with affordable housing is your rents are dictated by the state. But quite often the rent increases you get are more than your tenants can afford. And the thing that I do not miss since I retired is at times having to play God with rents, because we get a rent increase, and so conventional wisdom is you implement the rent increase so you have cash flow to maintain the building.
Right.
You're not making money. You're not making money off the buildings. You are trying to break even. But you look at somebody's rent, and I would have somebody whose income is $950 a month or $1,000 a month. They're already paying $650 or $700, and you get a $50. If you wanted to, you could raise their rent $50.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
No.
And so you have to know on the other side of from a maintenance standpoint that, and operate, cash flow standpoint, you're going to cut your legs off on that side, but we're not in the business to throw people out on the street. Market rate might have a different perspective, but I would have to tell my board I have to make mission decisions, not business decisions.
Right.
And the mission decision is, that instead of the $50 increase, I maybe do $10 increase in rent. And so this is why you see a lot of affordable housing complexes get into challenges, particularly with maintenance as the years go by, because there's just not enough cash flow coming through to maintain them properly. Or you have nonprofits, and some do make business decisions and say,
right.
Because I could have made a business decision, and there's a line of people out the door who will pay the $50 more to take the unit.
Yeah.
But I can't look that person in the face and say, tough luck, good luck, go talk to our homeless team over here, and we'll try to help you over there. I mean, that's just not the business we were in.
No. I do want to transition to talk about San Diego Seniors Community Foundation, but is there anything else about serving seniors or your time in that role that you want to talk about?
Well, I think I was fortunate to be able to do some national advocacy. So I served on a couple of national boards, chaired the California Commission on Aging.
Oh, wow.
And so I think as a nation, we are not prepared from a policy perspective to meet the demographics that we all know. I mean, we all know that with boomers, I mean, we are an aging country, and that, in the next decade, I mean, we're going to be 25% of folks are going to be over 60, 65 years old in this country. And, impacts on Medicare, Social Security, just our systems, caregiving. I mean, there's huge impacts that we're going to be felt because of aging, and we're not prepared. I mean, many of us, I know you're an advocate. We're out here waving our hands, saying this is happening. I believe we still have time if we act now to build the solid infrastructure, but we're not doing that. There's a lot of stuff happening these days in Washington. None of it related to how do we build infrastructure to deal with the fact that we're an aging society, and that the impact is going to be with us, another 30, 40 years, and we're not prepared.
What does that infrastructure include?
Well, I think the infrastructure, starting with, is we need to come up with funding mechanisms to assure that Social Security is going to be there and be the one leg of what we always call the three-legged stool, with Social Security, pensions, which most people don't have, and savings. But we need to make sure that Social Security is going to be there. Need to make sure that Medicare is there. Medicare, the big glaring glitches in Medicare, doesn't cover dental, doesn't cover hearing. Seniors have dental issues that can lead to health issues. Again, back to the discussion of human need and economic need. Dental problems cause hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars worth of health impacts to the health system simply because somebody didn't get their cavity taken care of.
Right.
But Medicare doesn't Medicare excludes this part and these from coverage. So we need to build that infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We've already talked about affordable housing. We need to make sure that we have affordability. On the positive side, that I don't think we're doing a very good job of, is we have all of these people with talents and abilities, and we're generally healthier than some of our prior generations as people get into their 60s, 70s, and 80s. How do we tap into and use this cadre of talent and ability to make our community better? And so it isn't all just the negative stuff. It's how do we leverage the positive that these folks bring? And we're not doing that. Right now, there's advocates out there fighting. Right now, we're fighting the battle to try to protect what we have and to minimize the cuts to what we have. We're all on defense, and nobody has the ability right now to go onto offense and to try to build that infrastructure that we're going to need for the next 30, 40 years in this country. So, sort of a call to arms, but right now it's going unheeded, and I think if we sit here 10 years from now, we may be scratching our heads and saying, why didn't we do something back in 2026?
Right. You mentioned California Commission on Aging. Can you tell us about that role and what that was about?
Sure. So I was appointed by, 2 terms. My first term, I was appointed by then Assembly Speaker Toni Atkins, and then second term when she was Senate President pro tem. And so the commission is statutorily in California law, and it is the principal advisory entity to the governor and legislator on older adult issues. And so we were tasked with, reviewing legislation, providing advice to the legislators and the governor on, recommending legislation, reviewing legislation, providing input. And then we traveled around California, taking in information and identifying issues that needed to be addressed in California. And so, it was made up of professionals in the aging area. We had gerontologists, we had lawyers, we had judges. It was a very high-level group, and it's well-respected in Sacramento, probably not so well-known outside of Sacramento, but it was very influential. And so I was appointed and fortunate enough to serve as chair for almost 2 years to guide it. And I used my, sort of bully pulpit as chair to really focus particularly on homelessness and affordable housing, and helped raise the issue, at least, so got people talking about it. But it's an important entity, and there's a couple folks from San Diego that are on the commission now. Dr. Lindsay Orman, who's a geriatrician,
I know Lindsay.
And Shelley Lyford from West Health is on. Joaquin Angara, formerly at AIS, Aging Independent Services, and a professor at San Diego State, I think are local representatives. But it's an important entity from a policy perspective. And I was pleasantly surprised to find out that legislators actually did turn to us for advice and input. And the governor as well, Newsom particularly, and I mean Newsom at our rate. One of the biggest things that we did was the commission partnered with West Health to get the California Master Plan on Aging. And so Newsom, what we did, and this was the 18 campaign, we got the leading candidates to sign a pledge to implement a master plan. And so Newsom actually came to Serving Seniors, and I gave him a tour. This was the campaign, so I toured him through with about 15 cameras trailing us, talking about some of the issues we're talking about. And then we took him into our dining room with about 100 seniors, and he sat down and he signed a pledge. And we said, okay, that's great. Now we'll have to see if is he actually going to follow through? And to his credit, he did. And so the master plan was developed, started work just a few months after he was sworn in, and California is now really the leader in terms of master plans. And much of the plan over the years is being implemented. Every year there are bills that are related to the master plan that are actually happening. And now California has been the example across the country on master plans. And so I think that's probably the sort of the crowning achievement of the commission was doing that. And I was fortunate to be the chair at the time to really get these implemented and to getting people to pay attention to aging. But it's keeping that momentum up to the federal level. I mean, that's really where we're missing the disconnect. At the federal level, the Administration for Community Living, which is where aging lives, was drastically cut by this administration. Has very little power or influence over policy, and very few members of Congress seem to care. The administration certainly doesn't care about aging, and that's the concern. Is we as advocates, we need to keep pressing, but there's this just overwhelming burden to just protect almost what we have.
Does the master plan on aging implement some of the structural or
some of it? Affordable housing is one of the, and streamlining. So it's moving in that direction, but we've not actually seen the legislation. We've seen some affordable housing legislation, but we've not seen legislation that actually addresses how do we condense this process? How do we streamline the process and get housing built faster?
How does the California Commission on Aging interface with California Department of Aging? Is there any overlap there?
Yeah, there's definitely a relationship.
Okay.
But so the California Department of Aging is, and Susan Damaris, who's the director there, is terrific. They are primarily the bureaucratic entity that is administering funding related to aging.
I see.
They definitely do some advocacy, and so Susan certainly has been at the forefront of doing some more advocacy, but it's been historically more of an administrative entity. The commission is more has been policy, and
I see.
And been at the forefront of that. So right now, the Commission on Homelessness, in fact, they're doing it in June, they're doing a homelessness, affordable housing workshop in Sacramento, but caregiving is another one of their major priority. The workforce related to aging, so they've got several priorities that they're involved with right now.
Nice. Shall we move on to the San Diego Seniors Community Foundation?
Sure.
I think you've reinforced my notion that you are kind of the person who was at the pinnacle of all the senior issues of San Diego for the past few decades.
Well, thank you.
And beyond. I mean,
I'm
the California Commission
Anyway,
I'm talking to the right person.
So, when I retired, we had a great successor in Melinda Forsty. She was very ready, more than ready to step in, and I was looking for a different, finding a different role, way to contribute, but frankly, After 30 years of 50, 60-hour weeks, I was ready to not work 50 to 60 hours.
Right.
And so took a few months off, and then was approached by Bob Kelly, who founded the San Diego Seniors Community Foundation. And it's one of the few foundations that are dedicated to older adults in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Very few. I think it's less than 4 or 5% are dedicated. And so he approached me about, just a part-time role to do advocacy. And so that was the fun stuff. So I don't have to do HR. I don't have any direct reports. I get to really focus on advocacy, policy, some of the priorities of the foundation. And so I said yes. I mean, I knew. I describe it as I'm failing at retirement because I've gotten, involved in a handful of things, but it was sort of purposeful that I needed to find my encore career in what I was going to do. And so the foundation is perfect. It's focused several focus areas, but elder fraud is one of the big ones that we're doing workshops across Southern California, and hopefully hope to expand that soon beyond Southern California. Longevity is a big issue on how to get older adults active and engaged. We talked a little bit about senior centers. If you look at the attendance at senior centers over the last decade, it's declining, mm-hmm. which doesn't make logical sense when you look at the demographics.
Right.
But what it tells you is that the programming at the senior centers is not attracting baby boomers, and it's particularly not attracting male baby boomers to come to senior centers. And so we need to shake that up, where we create what we're calling the longevity centers that are focused around fitness, focus on health-related classes and socialization opportunities, and whether it's a cooking class, it could be a wine tasting class, things that may not find in the traditional senior center, but motivate people to come because we know socialization is critical to physical and mental health.
Yeah.
And if you're sitting on the couch at home, or even if you're doing exercising at home, but you're not socializing, there's detrimental to your health. So we're trying to do is reimagine senior centers. And so one of them, we got a big grant from the Grossmont Healthcare District, and we're looking in East County to build a model longevity center, sort of again, senior center on steroids kind of a thing, where we really amplify the good parts of senior centers and then layer on things that we think will attract. And then we also want to kind of the raise all boats theory, make investments, grants to existing senior centers where they will invest in programming that hopefully goes beyond bingo. I mean, and unfortunately, and this is something I saw when I was on the commission traveling around California, a lot of senior centers are in what I call the church basement model, mm-hmm. where it's literally a church basement or a rec center, and they have lunch and bingo. And a lot of people show up at 5 minutes to 12, eat lunch, and at 12:25 they're out the door, or maybe they stick around and play a game of bingo, but it's not motivating people to get active and involved. So we need to change that paradigm. Mm-hmm. We need to give volunteer opportunities for older adults so that people remain engaged and don't end up just sitting on the couch. And then the other big thing we're doing actually is in the world of autonomous vehicles. We're partnering with Waymo, which is going to be coming to San Diego sometime later this year, because transportation is a huge gap for a lot of older adults. They're not able to drive, and getting transit works if you're close to a bus stop or a trolley, but if your house is a mile away from the bus stop, not so much. And so the foundation got a grant and did a study and determined that, and this is sort of counterintuitive, but that seniors were actually okay with the idea of autonomous vehicles, that the feedback that the concern that they raised was getting into cars with a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
So Lyft, Uber, or even a taxi driver. I'm getting into somebody and I feel vulnerable. And when you said I can get into it without a driver, which sort of you have to get over that hump, but then you showed them the data that said that the autonomous vehicle follows all traffic laws, doesn't have a couple of glasses of wine to drink. They suddenly said, so we've done several events with bringing seniors, and they are seemingly eager to embrace the technology. So we're working to bring this as a component. It's sort of like, again, an all of the above strategy where, we need a lot of different transportation options, but we see autonomous vehicles as a way to get people to and from doctor's appointments, the grocery store, or even the last mile. A taxi driver is not going to be thrilled to drive you a mile from the bus stop to your home. An autonomous vehicle isn't going to care.
Right.
And get you there. So those are the things that we're really focused on. And so I'm doing that, and joined Voices of Our City Choir board. So I'm
nice.
Still involved, and about 2/3 of the choir members are seniors. So keeping and the choir is made up, for those that don't know, people experiencing homelessness.
Oh, wow.
And so the music is the way to pull people in to be able to provide wraparound services for them. And the claim to fame was a few years ago they were on America's Got Talent and got the golden buzzer. So they do produce beautiful music, but incredible engagement. So
yeah,
I'm able to keep my hand in working with folks experiencing homelessness with a great organization, and my day job, such as it is part time, is working with the foundation.
Wonderful. I think you've been a gift to San Diego. Like, it's really been just something that has blessed the city, that you've been here for 30 years with serving seniors, and now with the San Diego Seniors Community Foundation. It's really something that we really have to appreciate. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time today.
Yeah, we really appreciate everything you've done, and for coming on here today. So thank you.
Thank you.